that for the first time in its history, first time since the Spanish colonization, Latin America is moving towards a degree of independence and also a degree of integration. The history of Latin America is very sharply split between a tiny rich elite and huge poverty, and the rich elite, who are have been the only active ones politically. They were oriented towards the colonial power. So that's where they ship their capital. That's where they have their second wealthy homes. Send their kids to school. This whole business. Very little integration internal to Latin America. I mean, even the transportation system shows that. It's beginning to change. They're moving towards a degree of independence and towards a degree of integration. The U.S. in the past has had two fundamental mechanisms for controlling Latin America. One is violence, the other is economic strangulation. They're both weakening. The last exercise of violence was in the year 2002, when in its dedication to democracy promotion, the U.S. supported a military coup to overthrow the elected government of Venezuela. Well, had to back down, for one thing, because there was a popular uprising in Venezuela. But another reason was just the reaction in Latin America, where democracy is taken a lot more seriously than it is in North America and Europe. And people don't think it's amusing anymore to have elected governments overthrown by a military coup. So the U.S. had to back down and turn to subversion instead, which is what's going on now. That's the last major use of violence. Incidentally, the U.S. is preparing for more use of violence. If you take a look at the number of U.S. military personnel throughout Latin America, the military bases, the training of Latin American officers, that's all going up very sharply. As for the economic option, that's being lost too. The most dramatic case perhaps was Argentina. Argentina was the poster child for the IMF, and following IMF rules, it led to the worst economic disaster in its history, totally collapsed. Then, violating IMF rules radically, they pulled out of it and have had rapid growth. And the international investing community and the IMF, which is a branch of the Treasury Department, couldn't do anything about it, even the refusal to pay debt. And Argentina, in fact, the president of Argentina said, well, we're ridding ourselves of the IMF. That means of U.S. economic strangulation. And worse, he was helped in that by Venezuela, which bought a large part of the debt. Bolivia is probably doing the same, and Brazil had already done it. Well, you rid yourself of the IMF, meaning the Treasury Department. That's seriously weakening the measures of economic strangulation, and it's worse. A lot of these policies are gaining significant popular appeal. In principle, it seems to me a very powerful and persuasive conception, but everything always depends on implementation. If there is really authentic popular participation, decision-making, free association of communities and so on, yeah, that could be tremendously important. In fact, that's essentially the traditional anarchist ideal. That's what was realized maybe the only time for about a year in Spain in 1936 before it was crushed by outside forces. But in fact, all outside forces, Stalinist Russia, Hitler, Germany, Mussolini's fascism, and the Western democracies cooperated in crushing it. They were all afraid of it. But if that was something like what you're describing, and if it can function and survive and really disperse power down to real people and participants in their communities, could be extremely significant. If Brazil and Venezuela can cooperate on major projects, joint projects, maybe ultimately the gas pipeline through Latin America, that's a step towards regional integration, which is real prerequisite for defense against outside intervention. You can't have defense if the countries are separated from one another and if they're separated internally from elites and general population. So I think these are extremely important developments. Colombia as well, and if it can be done, fine, you know, reduce the level of violence, maybe take some steps forward for the people of Colombia. But I think these other negotiations and discussions proceeding at the same time have a deeper, longer-term significance.